So this is lecture number 9, deals with populations and how we can control population size. In terms of the question that we're going to try and deal with, it's how does the environment turn out to control population, because in part it's the environment. It turns out all the testable objectives kind of dealt with the last one, and rather than trying to split them apart, I just dumped them all into the last one. So there's a few pages from the book that this turns out to apply to. So from last time, as long as you have food, shelter, and space, we can have population growth. It's not a difficult list, but provided you have food, shelter, and space, what results is what we call exponential growth. So we're going to have a rapid increase in population size. I like how I'm pointing at the screen and you can't see me pointing at the screen. So you get this rapid increase in population size because they have all the resources that they need. Unfortunately, in all environments, at some point you're going to run out of either food, shelter, and or space, and the result is logistic growth. And it maxes out at this hypothetical number that we call the carrying capacity. We don't know what the carrying capacity is until you go past it, and that's when populations start to decline. And then suddenly you have resources because you've dropped below the carrying capacity, so it bobs up again, and you get this undulating effect, this up and down or sinusoidal type curve. And that's basically saying here's what the environment can handle. We can't really go much beyond this because any population that goes beyond this point is messing in food, shelter, or space. So how do you limit the food, shelter, and space? Turns out there's two big categories of things. I know this is hard to read on the screen. I can see it fine, but when it's projected, it's probably pretty horrible. So hopefully you're looking at this on your phones to make it a little bit easier. But we can divide those things that control a population into two categories. One's called density dependent, and the other one is density independent. A density independent factor has absolutely nothing to do with the population size, and that those are things that are going to limit the population. Meaning, like this list here, I'll read it to you, so I apologize for reading, but it says on the left side, it says flood, fire, spraying with pesticides, change in climate or temperature, destruction of habitat, or drought. All of those things have nothing to do with how big a population is. So if there's a fire, if there's a population of 3, they will be equally as devastated as a population of 3 million. A fire is a fire. If there's no food, it doesn't matter how big the population is, there's nothing to eat. That's why we call these density independent. Density, how many organisms do you have living in a particular area? On the right side, it says density dependent, and that has to do with how big the population is. As populations get bigger, you're going to have issues with having food, you're going to turn out to have issues with shelter, you're going to have issues with the amount of available space. So those things, 3 things automatically occur. You're also going to have issues with reproduction because you might start running out of mating choices. You're going to have disease that's going to start to become an issue. If you get a new organism in the area, it's going to be easier to disrupt just because they can, if you happen to introduce a new predator, they can just wipe everything out because there's nothing that's going to be able to stop it. You also have fighting for the food, shelter, and space and stuff like that. So you have 2 sets of factors. One of them has nothing to do with population size, and they tend to be, when you look at the list, they're abiotic. Then you have another list, which is density dependent, and that has all to do with how big the population is. And there are things that occur in crowds that don't occur in scarcely populated areas, and that's what a density dependent factor would be. We can see this reflected in age pyramids. So an age pyramid just breaks up when people were born or what their ages are, and you can compare how many males and how many females you have, because that's the pairing that you need in order to have children. And if you look at the pictures here on the bottom left, there's a lot who are young. So what that tells me is there's going to be population growth. There's lots of young people. The percentage of the population is mostly young. That means they're reproducing. If you have one where it's basically a flat, it's stagnant all throughout, meaning the reproductive years are about all the same, so 55-ish down, it's pretty uniform, which you should be able to see here. That tells us that for the most part, growth is slowing. It might be slightly negative, but it's basically standing still. There's not much population growth. So if there is any population growth, it's probably due to migration. This last one here, which you notice is there's more in the middle than there are in the youth. That means the population is declining for some reason. It could be food, shelter, and space. It could be emigration. We don't know. But we can look at where are the ages, and we could figure out, wait, what's going on? Have they hit a carrying capacity? Do they have an issue with food, shelter, and space? Is this a density issue? Is this not a density issue? We could start to analyze it just based upon where's the population distributed. One of those things that, if it, like I said, if it has nothing to do with growth, it has to do with migration. And part of the story I told you on Friday is we're all immigrants from somewhere. So this map here, it's in German, so don't let that part throw you off too much. Basically, Homo sapiens are from Africa. There are various versions, so there are the Neanderthals, or the Neanderthals, as it should be pronounced in German. They are European, so they're European in nature. And there is evidence that there's another version of humans, and off the top of my head I can't remember. I think I want to claim Homo erectus, but that's not right. But anyway, they're found out in the Oceania area, so the island part of Southeast Asia. And what happened is Homo sapiens, us, left Africa, interbred, and kind of took over the other groups of humans, and the result is the world has been dominated by humans. Humans are indigenous to Eurasia and Africa. They aren't naturally found in Australia. They're not naturally found in the Americas. So if you live in Australia or you live in the Americas, you're a migrant. No matter how you wish to view it, if you look back far enough, we're all migrants. And it has changed a lot of what goes on in the world. Some populations rise and fall, and they will always do this. So this is actually from... No, this one didn't also show up in a AP Bio exam. But what you notice is there's a cycle referred to as the predator-prey cycle, which for the most part doesn't happen, but in some cases you can clearly see it, where if you happen to have a large number of the prey, the predators, the things that are going to eat them, tend to follow along. So, if there's a lot of things to eat, okay, so prey population goes up, predators can now feed on them, so their population will go up, but having a lot of predators means the prey population is going to decrease because they're eating too many. Well, now they ran out of food, so now the predator population goes down, which now means we don't have as many predators, so the prey population goes up. Hey, now there's more food to eat, so the predator population goes up, which means the prey population is going to be suppressed, and you get this oscillation effect that's always a little off. They don't rise and fall at the same time. They're always a little bit offset. But if you look at it, the prey population gets to increase quicker than the predator population does, but they kind of decline almost at the same time. This is referred to as the predator-prey cycle. It occurs in very unique ecosystems, meaning where there's basically one type of predator and one type of prey. When we look at populations, it doesn't matter if it's a predator-prey version or any other type. There's a different type of population number that people look at, and it's referred to as the effective population size. The effective population size, which is this formula up on the screen, this formula here, what this tells you about is how big is the population really? And by really, I mean, let's talk about the ones who can reproduce. So if you can't reproduce, you don't count. So if you're too young, you don't count. If you're too old, you don't count. That's what is meant by the effective population. These are the individuals who are capable of reproducing. And that's the population that turns out to matter, especially when we talk about populations in decline, because when the effective population size, the reproducing portion of the population, gets too small, what you end up getting is this cycle. And not all of these terms can make sense to us yet, like the genetic drift and the inbreeding and all that. So that part we can't talk about yet. We will. But what you effectively get is, as the effective population size gets smaller, its ability to survive decreases, which will make the population even smaller, which will make it even less likely that they survive, which will make it even smaller. And what you get is this spiral, this vortex, and we call it the extinction vortex. So population size turns out to be something worth studying. It is something worth us knowing how it's controlled, because we as humans are particularly decent at manipulating the environment such that it's good for us, but it might end up causing an extinction vortex in others because we're eliminating those that get to reproduce.